Hi, everybody. Welcome to Breaking Bread with Alie and Gabby. I'm Gabby Loren.
I'm Alie Valerio.
Today, we're bringing back Rudy Rochman all the way from Israel. He is a social activist and also stands up for Jewish rights and Jewish causes. Now, we've seen a lot of anti-Semitism in the news lately. It's been said from the New York Police Department that hate acts have been on the rise for the last few years, and it's gone up 26%. It's a staggering increase. So we want to talk to Rudy today about some of the things we're seeing where celebrities are coming out and saying all these anti-Semitic comments, and what's Rudy's response to this, and what is anti-Semitism in general. So Rudy, how would you define anti-Semitism and bigotry? And also, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. Sure, there's plenty to unpack here, and each individual celebrity that has said wrong things about the Jewish people have done it differently. So we can dissect and go into each one. But when it comes to anti-Semitism, it's a form of xenophobia against the Jewish people. Just as you would have racism against someone's skin pigmentation or their physical features. And there are different forms of racism, so there are different forms of anti-Semitism. So for example, you could be for all Black people to be killed or all Jewish people to be killed. That's one form of racism or anti-Semitism. Or you can be for Black people and Jews to be subjugated and to have lesser rights or not equal access to resources or not equal access to voting rights. And that's also a form of racism and anti-Semitism. So there are many layers and ways for one to be anti-Semitic. And in terms of the artists coming out, such as DeSean Wiley, or even the football player DeSean Jackson, they're of a school of thought based on what Farrakhan, who is a prominent, unfortunately, a leader amongst a lot of young Black people within the United States, which has basically gotten them to the conclusion that Israel and the Jewish people are the source of their problems. And that's how systemic anti-Semitism has always been spread, by finding the source of suffering and pain of a community and blaming that on the Jewish people. And if you look at historically, blaming the situation economically within Germany, blaming that on the Jews, the Black Plague, blaming that on the Jews, the death of Jesus and the murder of Jesus, blaming that on the Jews. And so historically, the way that you can actually pick up on anti-Semitism is by finding someone taking a situation and taking away all the context, all the history, all the narratives, anything about it, and either blatantly blaming the Jewish people or kind of manipulating it to get someone to the conclusion that this must be because of the Jewish people or Israel. So when we look at DeSean Jackson, he was basically saying that the Jewish people aren't the real Jewish people, which is a form of anti-Semitism because they're trying to disconnect us from our own identity and to rip it apart. But why is it so popular today within a lot of Black and people of color within America to talk about these things and to sort of adopt the mindset and the teachings of Farrakhan? Well, there are many layers to it. First of all, what we need to understand for people of color that have dealt with racism and slavery throughout the years is that they've also had their identity stripped from them. Most, if not all, Black people in the diaspora outside of Africa do not know what tribe they come from, what culture they come from, what language they used to speak, what identity they used to have, what clothing they used to wear. They just know that they came from Africa. And a lot of them today reject calling themselves African American because that's just combining a continent and a country. And on top of that, a country that they don't really feel that they're a part of, they feel minimized in, they feel still that there's systemic racism. So they really don't identify with this term. So they have a unique experience. However, they're still hungry and in need for an identity that has sort of been stolen from them. So that's already one thing, that a lot of Black people and people of color in America are looking for an identity. So that's one. Number two is the stories of the Bible and the stories of Exodus and the story of King David and Goliath, and fundamental stories that has allowed Black people to have inspiration to get out of slavery or to get out of tough situations. So these stories are fundamental to Black culture. So you have someone like Farrakhan realizing that a lot of people of color are missing a layer of their identity and are hungry and are looking for that layer of identity. They find the Jewish identity, the Jewish story, which they're already very much so connected because they've taken for the past generation so much inspiration from these stories, because at the end of the day, during slavery, the only book that was accessible for slaves was the Bible, and even after that. So these stories were really the only stories that they even had to read in the times that they had to struggle and in the times that their identities were being torn from them. So you have those two things, and then add another layer that a lot of the history of the Jewish people, do not know where we come from, do not know what we deal with, do not know what anti-Semitism is or what we still deal with today in terms of anti-Semitism. So for them, it's very easy to lump us with the white system that is oppressing them, because they see a lot of Jews that have risen into positions of power, and they just assume that not only are we a part of this power, but we're also the face of that power. And that's how anti-Semitism has always existed. If you look at the Middle Ages back in Europe, Jews were not allowed to own land and to participate in agrarianism, which the way people would do commerce and trade back then was by growing crops or cattle and going to the marketplace and trading, and Jews weren't allowed to participate. What were the Jews able to do? To be the tax collectors and the money lenders. And it's not like the tax they were collecting for themselves. They were collecting that for the king and queen. However, they were the face of the oppression. They were the face of the taxation. And that's exactly what is being done today. So add that they don't have a layer of their identity, that they don't understand who the Jewish people are, that they're very much so connected in terms of the values of these stories of the Jewish people. And there's also a layer of truth that they're playing on, that within Africa, there are tribes that have been displaced from Israel. And as we know, already in Israel, we have the Jews that were living in Ethiopia that have already come back, but there are also other Jews in Nigeria, the Igbos, in Uganda, in Zimbabwe, the Lemba tribes, in South Africa. And so it has actually been proven that a lot of the people that were taken into slavery, not most, but a lot, were actually Israelites, Hebrews that were displaced in Africa. So there is a layer of truth that a lot of people of color in America may have ancestry that was Israelite Hebrew. That being said, it doesn't mean necessarily that they're Jewish, Israelite, Hebrew today, because the way that we preserve our identity is by passing it down through the mother. However, there should be a way, if they can prove that they have lineage to that, for them to be able to come back to the greater collective. It doesn't mean just because you're Black that you're Jewish. It also doesn't mean just because you're light-skinned that you're not Jewish. And so there's a lot of things that they don't actually break down. And since so many Jews do not know how to tell their own story and haven't been telling their story, it's very easy for them to get manipulated by people who sound smart and tell them, give them some truth. So they're like, wow, these are things I never even know about. Let me learn more. And then they give them, no, you are actually the true Jews. The Jews are the devils and this and that. And then they play on some biblical texts where, for example, they say, they actually use something within the New Testament, which as Jews we don't accept. But within the New Testament, it describes Jesus having bronze skin and white hair like wool. And so they say, oh, well, woolly hair is nappy hair. It's black hair. It's afro. And bronze skin is black. So first of all, there are people that are black in the Torah, in the Bible, that are not depicted as bronze. They're depicted as black. So why would you depict someone as bronze when you already had depicted someone as black if the person is black? And number two, it says white hair like wool, not woolly hair. So it's describing the color of the hair, not the texture of the hair. And even if it was describing the texture of the hair, there are many Jews that have Jufros. Or Jesus could have been black. I'm not saying that for sure he wasn't. But to use those words to say for a fact this person is black is completely false and ridiculous. Then the other thing that they say from the Old Testament is that it says that Jews will be taken on slave ships into slavery into Egypt. Now, for Jews, we have the written Torah and we have the oral Torah. The oral Torah is the explanation of the written Torah that was passed down throughout generation and eventually codified, and explains when it says taken as slave ships into Egypt, it's not that we're going to be taken back into Egypt, but Egypt for us on a spiritual level means diaspora. So we'd be taken back into the diaspora. And yes, Jews were taken on slave ships. We didn't get to Rome as slaves on first class tickets on planes 2,000 years ago. So we were taken as slaves on slave ships. It's just they don't know that part of Jewish history. So since Black people were taken on slave ships from Africa to the Americas, it's very easy to say, oh, well, that didn't happen to Jews because they don't know about that, and then get them to the conclusion, no, you are actually the true Israelites. So all those things together has led these individuals to take a position and to basically adopt the school of thought that is coming from Farrakhan.
You also brought up descriptions of what people look like according to the New Testament, right? Mm-hmm. So what I also want to bring light to is this idea of what a Jewish person actually is supposed to look like. Because I think people have this preconceived notion, which is very anti-Semitic and also racist, in my opinion, that like Jews are rich and, own everything and they're white usually. But that's not the case. We, especially me and Alie, we have many Black Jewish friends, people of color. Alie herself is not like the typical Jew, that's stereotyped out there, right? Alie, you're
Spanish, Italian, Mexican, Jewish.
Exactly. So she's even a mix. We're all kind of like this mutt mix thing going on. But I think it's, really disheartening to hear people act like it's separate, because there's a lot of Black Jewish people out there that are hearing other African American or regular, just other Black people from other countries and areas say that Jewish people are this, Jewish people are that. And they're also segregating people by religion. And that's their own people too. How are you going to come out and hate somebody? We're in 2020 right now. We should all be showing love and appreciation for each other and opening our mind and educating ourselves. So I find it unbelievable that there are people of color out there that would even put this stuff in mainstream and try to segregate and separate us even more. What's your opinions on that?
Yeah, well, already when a people are so traumatized and hurt, it's understandable that they come to certain conclusions and that they then think that the people that have been oppressing them and hurting them are the community that is successful, and then sort of project that pain onto them. It's very understandable. It's similar to, the Jewish people. Even us, we've dealt with a ton of trauma. And when you look at the reaction to that trauma, there are usually Jews that stand up and fight against it, stand up and fight to anti-Semitism. There are Jews that make excuses for it and pretend it doesn't really exist, or that it's not an issue, or they shouldn't have to deal with it. And there are other Jews that actually blame themselves and side with their oppressors. So there are many ways to deal with trauma, and it's not always very pretty. So it's understandable that this community is trying to latch onto an identity that has been ripped from them and that they need, and that they are attacking what they think is their oppressor. And that's exactly how systemic anti-Semitism has been existing within white societies, by blaming the Jews and making the Jews seem as the source of the problem, as the source of the oppression, as the source of the pain for all communities. And we see that even today with the whole Black Lives Matter, and saying, oh, well, the Israeli police train the Israeli army trained the police departments to be violent against people of color. Well, number one, no, maybe a few ex-military IDF soldiers did some Krav Maga self-defense training, which everything about Krav Maga is about limiting the violence so that you get out of his situation, not beat someone, not hurt someone, but remove yourself of that dangerous situation, like remove the gun and put it away, not actually hurting someone. And number two, or counterterrorism measures to how to prevent hostage situations having nothing to do with policing day to day. And also the argument of Israeli army trained the police department to be like that, as if before 1948, the New York State Police Department wasn't racist and wasn't doing things that were bad, and you didn't have individual cops that were violent. So these explanations of a situation is trying to blame the Jewish people for a current struggle that exists. Now, you mentioned a few things that I do want to touch on. You said that there is no look for the Jewish people, and that's the reality. We're not a nation that is based on characteristics. Jews come in every single color and in every single shape. There's no typical look for the Jewish people. We also always came in many different colors. Back when we were living in Judea, we had King David that was a redhead. We had the wife of Moses that was black. We had people that really came in all sorts of colors, and today we still come in all sorts of colors. Now, in terms of the narrative of Jews are supposed to be black or Jews are supposed to be this, there's another part of the Old Testament that, since their source for their explanations is from the Bible, that's why I use the Bible, because I will only use it unless someone is bringing it up as a source. But if you use it as a source, you have to use the whole source. You can't just pick and choose what you want. But it describes actually the wife of Moses as being black. And the response of Miriam, Moses' sister, to when she first meets Moses' wife is actually one of rejection because of her skin color. And she's punished with leprosy for judging her because of her skin color, which is actually the first mention within the Torah, within the Bible, of racism. And it shows how the Torah sees racism, that that's actually something punishable, and that that's not good. Eventually she does tshuva, repents, and eventually she's healed of her leprosy. But I would make the argument, even let's say if the Torah wasn't true, at the very least, these stories had to be identical to the characters that were adopting these stories 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago. So even if you cannot prove that these individuals existed, which I'm not making the case, you could at least prove that it had to be a characteristic of the actual real people for them to accept that. Now, why would Miriam reject his wife of Moses by being of color if the average person was of color? So very clearly within that, you can tell that the average individual back in the day maybe were brown and dark skinned, like myself, like Ali, like other people. However, they were not black. That doesn't mean you couldn't have had also some people that were black, but the average wasn't black. And eventually, as populations merged, you had people that were more light-skinned, more dark-skinned, and our population was really diverse. Now, in terms of being white, what does it mean to be white today? Because it's not only talking about your skin color. Because you can have someone that's albino that is way lighter than a Caucasian, and an albino African is not white. You can have someone that has a disease where your skin starts changing colors, and that doesn't mean that you're white. You can have someone that's Asian, that's very light skinned. For example, a lot of Chinese and Japanese people are very light skinned. Some aren't, but some are. That doesn't mean that they're white either. So being white is a sort of political term that means more than just someone's skin color. It means their origins, and it means their status in the society. So the origins of the Jewish people, no matter if you're talking about Ashkenazi Jews, Mizrahi Jews, Sephardi Jews, Ethiopian Jews, Bnei Menashe Jews, all sorts of Jewish communities, DNA-wise, genetically, we descend from the Middle East Levantine people. Even everyone doing their DNA test now that is very popular, and they get Ashkenazi DNA, and it says Eastern European DNA, Ashkenazi DNA, and then you click on it, the explanation is Middle Eastern DNA that has been displaced for a long period of time in Europe. So the reason it's saying European DNA is because it's displaced in Europe, but not because its origins are from Europe. So in terms of our genetics, we're not originally from Europe. In terms of our culture, the language we speak, the foods we eat, the laws that we carry, the ethics and values that we have, that's also not from Europe. Our homeland isn't from Europe. So our origins are already not from Europe. Secondly, our status in white societies, we've always been treated as the other, persecuted, and even exterminated for not being white. Our grandparents' generation was massacred by 6 million for not being part of the Aryan race. And even today in white society in America, in a time that's supposed to be all free and everything well, the only movements on college campuses and in intellectual spaces against minorities are the movements against the Jewish people. And when you're talking about hate crimes, you spoke about hate crimes in New York City. If you take all the hate crimes against all communities, people of color, LGBTQ+, women, people against Muslims, whatever it is, double that, and that's the amount of hate crimes that you have against Jewish people, and yet the Jewish people make this percentage of the population, and other communities make up a larger percentage. So very clearly, anti-Semitism is still a thing, and we're still dealing with anti-Semitism. So I would say that the Jews aren't white, because when you're talking about being white, our origins are not from Europe, and our status in white societies is not white either. But then there's the conversation of, well, what about white privilege? I get that Jews are not from Europe, that they've never been accepted in white societies, but you can say that some of them, those that have lighter skin pigmentation, don't have white privilege. So I ask the people that say that, why do you see white privilege only through the lens of people of color? Because when it comes to dealing with white supremacy and xenophobia against the Jewish people, we may not all deal with racism, those Jews that don't have dark skin, but we deal with our own form of xenophobia in white society. We have shoot-ups of synagogues. We have shoot-ups of schools. We have constantly attacks happening left and right physically against Jews just walking to their after holidays. You have constantly ideological movements trying to target Jewish rights and Jewish aspirations and Jewish empowerment on the college campuses. So we deal with our own forms of xenophobia. It's different than racism, but that doesn't mean we have white privilege, because you wouldn't tell someone that's black that they have white privilege just because they don't deal with anti-Semitism. So don't tell the Jews that don't deal with racism that they have white privilege just because they don't deal with racism. So the point is that within a white society, there are several layers and several forms of xenophobia targeting people that are not white. And just because one person doesn't deal with a specific form of xenophobia against a specific class that isn't white, doesn't mean that all of a sudden they have white privilege. And I would go even further. When Jews wear their Magen David and wear their chais, or are dressed modestly, or have their peyot, or have their kippah, then we're just as noticeable as being Jews as someone of color, and right away. Now the argument is, well, if you actually remove all those things, then you can be white passing. I was like, okay, well, let's say you had a Jew that was called Chaim Goldberg, and an African-American, a black person that's called Joe Johnson. And when someone is reading a list, you can't see their color, but they can reasonably say that this person is Jewish, and this person, I don't know, might be white, might be black. So, and that can happen the other way around. You can have someone that has a very black name and a very white name that is Jewish. But the thing is, like, it's not one brush, one paint that you can put over an entire population. You have to understand that when it comes to xenophobia in a white society, there are many layers to it. And Jews do not have white privilege, because when you go and talk to white supremacists, what are they going to tell you? We hate Jews and we hate black people, and we don't want them, and they're not part of our society. So that's the test to see if we have white privilege. That doesn't mean that we deal with racism. The Jews that are dark deal with racism, but the Jews that are light don't deal with racism, but we deal with our own forms of xenophobia.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Jewish people that are of color are dealing with not only issues in anti-Semitism, like you mentioned, but they're also dealing with racism. So it's a double whammy that, you know, they have to handle at the same time. So my heart goes out to people that are, you know, both, and they have to deal with the double the struggle of everybody else. But I think all of our hearts need to open around this situation. And if you don't want to be judged, then we shouldn't be judging others. Judgment has no place here. Alie, did you have a thought?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because you hear the history of the Jews and Black people. We have a very similar history of like being persecuted and executed and kicked out of everywhere we've ever lived for not being white and for being seen as like a threat. So how do you think we could band together as ethnic minorities to create a more peaceful world if we're not white?
Sure. Well, I think historically we used to band together. I think if you look at the civil rights movement, Jews were at the forefront of the rights movement. Many killed for helping people of color. Many Jewish lawyers helped, achieve certain things within the law for it to change. So Jews historically were side by side with people of color against racism, fighting against segregation, fighting against Jim Crow, fighting against all these things. The problem today is that most Jews in America, at the very least, do not understand who they are. And if they understand who they are, they do not know how to express that and externalize. So if you look at the evolution of racism in America, now there's still deep systemic racism issues in America, such as how policing is done when it comes to crack versus cocaine, such as how education is done based on property taxes, the way that the prison industrial system is built. And there's a lot of things that have to be dealt with in America. However, if we go 80, 90, even 60, 70 years ago, there clearly was way more racism then out and about than there is today. I mean, at that time, you didn't even have civil rights yet. So how did we go from that point to this point? Because we still need to go from this point to a better point, but how did we go from there to there? Well, Black people and their allies fought for their rights, and people suffered, people died because they were fighting for justice. And when you fight for justice, that sometimes comes with a large risk for your life and for your wealth and for your ability to be, to succeed and to be in a social setting. There's a lot of risk that comes with fighting for justice. So today we're at a level where when you go to a college campus or to an intellectual space, if there's someone that says something racist, all of the society sees that as bad. Almost the entire campus rejects that and identifies that. And almost every single Black student is conditioned and prepared to deal with that. They know exactly what to answer. They know how to call it out. They're given the courage and the strength to be able to call it out when it happens. And almost every student that isn't of color is conditioned and prepared to side with them. And that's normal. However, when you look at anti-Semitism, when someone on a college campus says something against Jews, not only does the rest of the campus not say anything, but the Jews themselves don't say anything. So before we go and build coalitions and get people to understand who we are, we need to be able to have the strength amongst ourselves to be able to stand up to it, to have the courage, to know how to narrate our story, to know how to recognize and fight against anti-Semitism. So before we go and build coalitions with others and explain them, we need to heal ourselves first to be able to express to other Jews, to the next generation, which is why I think that the Jewish education in the diaspora, especially in America, failed so many young Jews, because they taught them about how to be Jews in theory, but not how to be Jews in practice. How to pray, how to do certain things, how to keep Passover, which are very important, but not how to be a Jew in a society that there's a lot of anti-Semitism, how to deal with that, how to debate, how to talk to the left, how to talk to the right, how to create coalitions, how to understand other movements, how to understand the movements against you, what are their reasoning, what are their sources, what are their books. We have not been prepared for that. And so we need to first fix ourselves. And once we understand who we are and we've given ourselves the tools to do so, then we need to go build coalitions with others so that we can keep anti-Semitism down. Because after the Shoah, there's been this big saying, never again. And every Jew has heard it. But never again doesn't mean that just because you say never again, it's not going to happen again. It means we take a generational commitment to make sure that it doesn't happen again. So now that it is happening again, now that anti-Semitism is on the rise, not only ideologically, but also physically, we have to make sure that it's kept down. And if we fail, we know what comes next. And then we actually should be blamed for it because it was our responsibility to prevent it in the first place.
Can we go back to the a topic you mentioned before about white privilege and how this is not white privilege. There was a trending topic after all of these situations with these different celebrities coming out with anti-Semitic comments, and a trending hashtag was Jewish privilege. So I'm actually happy that people took it upon themselves to fight back on social media and to defend the Jewish people, to show how, wearing, like you mentioned, the necklaces before, the chai, the Star of David, how that can trigger someone to react in an anti-Semitic way. However,
It does.
That is our Jewish privilege, not our white privilege. I think it's really great that social media has an outlet for us to be able to come together and talk about these hard conversations. What's your opinion on how that got up and trending in social media's collective consciousness?
In terms of the Jewish privilege thing, the way it was being played out from the Jewish side was sort of, let's create this hashtag to show that we actually don't have privilege and that we're actually constantly targeted. And if you look at the Jewish population within the world, we're between 0.01% to 0.02% of the world's population. So in reality, most of the world has never met a Jew. But yet, if you look at the opinions of the world on Jews, it's almost always negative, and not always just negative, but like horrible. Like people in Bangladesh think that Jews have horns, and people in Malaysia think that Jews are these baby killers, that we drink blood, and we've really been demonized in the rest of the world. So to say that we have privilege because some Jews are successful, that's like saying that, oh, well, you have Black individuals that have become successful, that means there's no more racism. So if we're not going to hold people of color to that standard and minimize their experiences because some people made it, that doesn't mean we need to limit or minimize or transform the Jewish experience because some people made it. And in terms of making it, we're actually proud that many Jews make it. And the reason that many Jews make it is because we, as a culture, value literacy. I mean, if you go back 200, 300 years ago when the whole world was not literate, every single Jew is literate because we have our bar and bat mitzvahs to become a man or to become a woman. And you have to learn to read and write. You have to learn how to challenge. You have to learn how to question yourself. Having both parents in the home is a big value of the Jewish community. Teaching your kids to be the best that they can be and giving them all the opportunities that they can is a part of our culture. Now, that doesn't mean every single individual that is Jew is raised the same way. That doesn't mean every single individual Jew had both parents at home. That doesn't mean every single individual Jew was always literate. But for the most part, these were key elements of our culture. Then furthermore, we also help one another. That's something that a lot of people of color in the music industry talk about, like Jay-Z and Kanye West and different individuals. They say, look at how Jews are able to help one another to rise up in society. We as people of color have to do the same. Now, that's not saying that some people do that. That's not saying that all Jews do that. But the reality is that this is a very big part of Jewish culture, to help one another. And because of those things, we're able to work our way up. But the thing is, when it comes to racism might be like this in a white society, but anti-Semitism might have its peaks, because we may be fine for a generation or two, but the second that we're no longer fine, 6 million of us die. All of us get kicked out of Spain. We all have these pogroms. We get blamed for the Spanish Inquisition. So the experience of anti-Semitism in white societies is not the same experience as racism in white societies. And to put them together and to compare them as if they're the same does a disservice to both. Unfortunately, many people of color, like Nick Cannon, like DeSean Jackson, like all sorts of individuals, Wiley in the UK, that have taken these comments against the Jewish people, have no idea about our experiences, our identity, and our history. And I understand them. No one has ever communicated to them. So if we want to change the outcome, we need to change the formula, and we need to plug in different variables. We need to be able to train a younger generation that is ideologically and intellectually strong.
Now, speaking of Wiley and Nick Cannon, a lot of times people will bring up conspiracy theories, like Nick Cannon brought up the Rothschilds and owning the banks and running everything. So why is it not okay to judge an entire group of people based on one thought, even if there was some truth to it?
Well, because if you're trying to touch on a subject, you're trying to find truth, you're trying to find justice, you're trying to solve a situation, and by pinning all the evils of a situation all on the Jews is, one, not going to solve your situation, but just going to cause more injustice. So the way to solve injustice is not by creating more injustice. The way to create light is not by creating more darkness. So already that doesn't fix the issue, but it even furthers the issue and creates more negativity in this world. Now, the best way to train yourself to pick on systemic anti-Semitism is whenever you hear someone along the lines of saying, the Jews did it, or the Jews are behind it, or it's because of the Jews, and they find the evil. Even now with Corona, the Jews did it. Every single issue, the far right sees the Jews as the evil communists, and the far left sees the Jews as the evil capitalists. Every single issue, somehow, every group finds a way to blame the Jewish people or Israel on. And that's something that's unique to the Jewish people. Black people don't deal with that. Black people deal with racism and systemic anti-Semitism from white societies, but they don't deal with every single community blaming them for their source of evil and problems. They might have communities that don't like them, that want to oppress them, that want to imprison them, that want them out or want them segregated, which is something that has to be fought against. We may not have that. We, in terms of systemic anti-Semitism, have people blaming us for any problem that exists. So you have a problem with capitalism and banking and loans and interest and all those things. Great. Let's find a wealthy Jew, one individual out of plenty that were bankers, and blame this guy for all the problem regarding to banking. And you find that in any single issue that you find out, you'll find a community that pulls and blames the Jews for them. Even now with slavery, there's a big thing that, the Jews financed slavery. The Jews did that. Again, this is the theme. The Jews did that. The Jews did that. The Jews did that. And when it comes to slavery, Jews, since they couldn't own land, a lot of them were in import and exports. They were owning ships because they could not participate in agrarianism, so they had to go into different businesses. That doesn't mean that every single ship company were owned by Jews. Jews were like this of the population, so most ship companies were not owned by Jews. But because some Jews owned shipping companies, and the king and queen forced those companies to comply with transportation of human beings in slavery, so they take those few individuals that were forced to do that by the king and queen, and they say, this means that the Jews did that. No, the people that were involved with the slave trade are horrible. You could be a Jew, you could be not a Jew. It's not because you're a Jew that you're a good person. It's not because you're not a Jew that you're a good person. You're a good or a bad person based on your values, based on your actions, based on the things that you do and the time that you use in this life to make the world a better place. So to take one individual, one act, and to blame an entire community on it, not only does not fix the injustice that was committed in the first place, but ignores the injustice and creates an injustice on another population.
It's so funny because there's such parallel lines between the Black community, like you brought up before, and the Jewish community. If you have one bad neighborhood in America that's predominantly people of color, you're going to get people outside of that in the white community throwing stereotypes out there. And that's exactly what happens with the Jewish people, as you mentioned. If one person was a slave owner, now everybody is a slave owner. Now all the Jews are bad people. But you're right. It comes down to morals. This is an individualistic concept. You don't judge somebody based on the person in the other corner. You judge them for who they are, and then you judge that other person in the corner for who they are. You cannot judge somebody based on an ideal of an entire population of people. It's just
if you look at the main tools of colonialism, it's always going to a society and pitting the minorities against each other. And you see that also happening with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Where did this conflict stem from? It stemmed actually, part of it, from the British. The British came here and colonized the land, and the population of Jews and Arabs were living in this land. And the Arabs thought that the British were with the Jews because of the Balfour Declaration, which, by the way, is just a paragraph that promises that they may give the land one day to the Jewish people. That was written in the 1920s, and Israel was created in 1948, so it had nothing to do with the Balfour Declaration, because the reason why Israel was created in 48 is because the Jews terrorized the British to leave. They made the price of occupation more expensive than the benefits of exploitation. They blew up their oil refinery, they blew up their military bases until they just had to leave. So that's why the British left. However, they gave the impression to the Arabs that the British were with the Jews. And to the Jews, they gave the impression that the British were with them. If you talk to any Jew that knows history of the modern state of Israel and what happened before, they will see it as the British sided with the Arabs. If you talk to Palestinians and to Arabs, they will see it as the British sided with the Jews. When in reality, they sided with neither one. They sided with themselves. And the way that British have always done, that doesn't define every single British individual, doesn't define England today, but the way colonialism for England happened back in the day was always divide and conquer. And the same thing happened in India and in Pakistan. the same people. Divide and conquer. Let's turn them against each other. Let's play on the cultural differences that exist, whether that be Islam and Hinduism, or whether that be the Jews and the Arabs. Let's play on that. Let's convince them that they are the enemy of each other and let them fight each other while we profit. And that's sort of what we're seeing today. Instead of dealing with these systemic issues that are affecting both communities, let's pin them against each other. I can guarantee you that there are people laughing right now, looking at the Jewish people and the Black people while they're succeeding, while they're on top, and while they're creating these anti-Semitic realities and racist realities, and that they're looking at the two communities that should be fighting with each other together against the people that are oppressing them, and instead we're fighting each other. So there's a reality that we just need to change here, and it's through education, it's through empowerment, it's through spreading light, it's through having deeper conversations, being more honest about holistic truths, and hopefully we can get out of that.
Now, a lot of times when I'm having conversations with friends who are not Jewish, especially people of color, I get into a conversation about how Talmud's being misinterpreted, and people have these questions as to like, why was this said or that said? And it kind of has this misconception. Like, for example, ADL.org, they had posted an article back in 2012 about how a new Arabic translation of the Talmud promoted anti-Semitic narratives and how misleading it was. So, Rudy, why do you think that's happening, and what are some examples?
Well, it's not just unique to the Talmud. They take the Talmud, they take the land, they take the DNA, they take the belief system, they take the army, they take the success, and whatever element of the Jewish people that is part of who they are, they're going to try to dissect it, pull things out, manipulate it, mistranslate it, and get people to the conclusion that this is bad. So it's part of systemic anti-Semitism to do that, which I'm sure the mistranslation into Arabic and specifically taking things out of context was a part of that. Recently, I saw a video of a neo-Nazi taking the Talmud and doing something very similar. And one of the things that he brought up was, it says here in the Talmud that Jews should not go to barbers that are non-Jewish because, non-Jewish people apparently can't cut their hair because they're too good and they can't get their hair cut by non-Jews. And it's like, no, this was said at the time where many non-Jewish barbers were actually killing Jews while cutting their hairs and shaving their beards. Because if you look back in the day, you didn't have these electric buzzing clippers. You had scissors and you had knives that you would go and cut people. And so many Jews were getting killed in their barbershops going to get their haircuts that rabbi said, because right now the status is that there's a high risk for that, we're going to say that now you should only get your haircut from other Jews. But that wasn't something that was indefinitely, and that was something that happened because of a context. So obviously, if many people went and got their haircuts and shaves were killed, then you would try to limit that from happening. That doesn't mean that's the reality today. That doesn't mean that Jews shouldn't go and get their haircuts elsewhere. So again, it's taking things out of context, not understanding when things were written, how they were written, what they were meant to be, and finding a way to intentionally manipulate that to get people to think, oh, the Jews, they can't get their haircuts from other people.
Education is the best way to eradicate this, I believe, because if you don't educate yourself and understand what these teachings are, who the Jewish people are, then you're going to constantly live in hate and choose hate over fear. I mean, hate over love, fear over love.
Yeah, it's so interesting, Rudy, because it sounds like throughout history, Jewish people have been the scapegoats. Like they've always been blamed for things throughout history. The diaspora, we've been all over the world, and yet we maintain this bond and this identity that we're Jewish, even though we look different, right? Why do you think it is that the Jewish people have been used as scapegoats? And I hear you also saying like education, Jews need to educate themselves about their culture and their history. What else can we do to make sure that when anti-Semitism does rise again, because it usually will, what do we do as a people to bind together and like fight against it?
Yeah, so first of all, when it comes to why there's anti-Semitism, I think there are many answers to that. I think there are many answers that I may not yet know and that I will find out in the future. So when I'm going to speak now, it doesn't mean that I know everything. It doesn't mean that someone else can't have an answer for it as well. But for me, I see three main answers. The first is the success thing, that Jews tend to succeed, not all Jews, but if you look at the percentage of Jews that there are, I believe there are like 2% of Jews, 2% of the Americans' population is Jewish, 0.02% of the world's population is Jewish, and yet you look at a lot of Nobel Prizes and 40 to 50% of them are Jewish. You look at a lot of companies and properties and all sorts of things, a lot of them are owned by Jews. Not all of them, not most of them, but a lot of them. So how does it make sense if this population is so small? And it's not because Jews are genetically better, it's because our culture teaches the Jewish child to really try to be the best that they can be. I mean, the Jewish mother and father usually tells their kids, you can be the doctor, you can be the lawyer, you can find the cure for cancer, you can create the new technology. We're really raised in a family, for the most part, not every single one, with a culture that teaches us to be the best they can be, to challenge, to be literate, to go and do the best in math, do the best in science, do the best in all sorts of fields that you go and study, give you the most opportunities that you can. I remember growing up as a child, when I first came to America at the age of 5, my parents came with nothing. I was sharing a room with my brother, and I remember like certain birthdays, it was a Happy Meal toy from McDonald's, right? That's until my parents were able to make it. But they always invested in our education. They always found a way to make sure that we had all the opportunities, that we had all the resources. Really, education was not something to play with. It became at number one. And that's a big part of Jewish culture. Again, that's not all Jews, but when you have that as a big part of Jewish culture, naturally, that does impact a lot of the Jewish people moving forward. So there is an element of, why do the Jews always succeed? And I think it's because they don't understand our culture. I think it's because they also don't understand the suffering and the experiences that we've gone through. But there are another two explanations that I've come to the conclusion of. It's the element of being a traitor. And a lot of people see the Jew as the other, and it's because we are the other. And what I'm going to say about that is I have grandparents that were born in Morocco and Algeria that were kicked out of North Africa and fled to France. And I have grandparents that were born in Eastern Europe, in Poland, that were kicked out of there and fled to France during the Holocaust and hid in attics to survive the war. Now, I have a grandma who was born in Algeria, grew up in Morocco, kicked out from Oujda in 1948, and then left to France with my grandfather and created her life there. And she always says, I'm French and I'm Jewish. And I'm like, what do you mean that you're French? And it's like, well, I have a French passport and this is a society that I've lived in and that I grew up in. And I was like, yeah, but that's not really hard, because clearly you weren't Moroccan in Morocco. My grandparents on the other side weren't Polish in Poland. If you were born here, not if I look at my life, my grandparents were born here. If you yourself, grandma, if you were born here in France, you would have been shipped off to the gas chambers as well. So what makes you French? He's like, well, France gave me everything that I had. I was like, okay, I'm going to ask you 3 questions, grandma, to show you that you're actually not French, and to show you how actually, when you say you're French, it leads to a lot of people misunderstanding who we are and getting to the wrong conclusions. So I asked her, what, if you go to a supermarket and you need to buy an avocado, and you see an avocado made or produced in Israel and an avocado made and produced in France, which one are you going to buy? It's like, the one made in Israel. I'm like, okay, if there's a war and France is in a war hypothetically with Germany, and Israel's at a war with Iran, and you have to send your son to one of those wars, which one are you going to send him off? She's like, the one to Israel. It's okay. 3rd question. If you need to give, you have $100. You only have $100, and you need to give this money to tzedakah. Now, there's a family of Jews in Argentina that need help, and there's a family in Paris that need help, but the family in Paris isn't Jewish, and the family in Argentina is Jewish. I know, grandma, that you would help both if you could, but in this case, you have $100 and you can only help one. And she said, the Jewish family in Argentina. And it's not because they're Jewish and have this religion, it's because it's their family. Naturally, you would want to help every individual, but first you have a priority to your children, to your brother and sister, to your parents, to your close relatives. It is obvious that you have a priority towards them. And that's why she picked the Jewish people. And I told her, you see, grandma, in theory, you say that you're French, but in practice, in every situation, you're not French. How do you think that makes the people that are French feel? They see you as a traitor. They see you saying that you're French, trying to get the same resources and the same level of status within French society, but in practice, the way you act is not French, is Jewish and Israeli. So how do you expect them not to get to a conclusion that you're a traitor when that's the way that you act? So I think we need to have a conversation of, that doesn't mean we can't live in other societies and we shouldn't respect other societies. To the contrary, a deep part of Jewish values is to be Or Laguim, to be a light upon others and to help spread light and to be productive and respectful of the laws wherever you live in. However, we also have to be clear as to who we really are. And so if you look at the situation, even let's say coming into America, where I grew up or both of you live, if you have a Chinese student that is doing a foreign exchange program, no one is going to see that person as a traitor. That person is legally here. They're doing their studies. This is a great individual. They're doing their thing and they're going back to China. However, if someone comes and is a U.S. citizen and is also a Chinese citizen, and then says, I'm American, but sells information and kind of does espionage on America for China, then all of a sudden that person is a traitor. So it's not because that it's bad. It's the way they present themselves and the way that they act that causes the host country to reject them and not understand them. So that's a big part, I think, that plays a lot of into anti-Semitism. And then the third answer is a more Kabbalistic, metaphysical conversation, and that's to understand what kind of role the Jewish people are supposed to play within this world. So I see the world as sort of one body, one human body. And within a human body, you have a singularity because it's one person. But within a body, you also have many organs. The eyes need to function, the heart needs to function, the liver needs to function, the brain needs to function, and they're all very different, but they all need to know their role and work together in order for the body to be healthy. And in fact, even if an organ doesn't work, then the body fails. And if you get a transplant of a new organ, if that organ doesn't fit the body and all the other organs fight it off and reject it. So when it comes to the Jewish people, the way I see it is that every nation has to pick and has the right to pick what kind of function they play in the body. Now, other nations can pick the same function that the Jewish people have picked as well, but the function that we've picked is to be the immune system. We've picked within our own mission statement, within our own culture, you'll ask any Jew and they'll know what tikkun olam and ola goyim means. To be a light upon other nations, to help others that are in darkness, that don't have access to technology, to water, to resources, to help fix slavery, to help fix all sorts of evils that exist, and to fix the world, to empower others and fix the world. If that is the mission statement that we've taken upon ourselves, and that we're clearly very successful and very good and very strong as a people, and we have a responsibility that we've appointed on ourselves. When it says chosen people, it's not God that chose us, it's we that chose the Torah. It's us that chose that responsibility. So we chose that responsibility. We have the tools and capabilities to end those suffering, and we don't. Individual Jews may do it, but as a collective, as a nation, we are not fulfilling the purpose of the bodily function that we chose to do. And so when your organ or your immune system within the body is not working, the body rejects it. So it's not even a conscious rejection to the Jewish people. It's sort of a subconscious rejection. And it's not because the Jewish people are doing the evil, it's because the Jewish people have the tools and the ability and took on themselves the responsibility to fix those evils. And although individual Jews may be doing that, as a collective we're not. What is the point of Israel? Israel is supposed to be a vehicle. We're supposed to be the driver, and we're supposed to use that vehicle to get to a destination that within Jewish culture we call Mashiach. Now, in the very materialized version, it's a man that comes and all of a sudden everything is fine. But in Judaism and Kabbalah, it's actually the success of a generation that is able to use Israel as a vehicle to be able to make the world a better place and to help give liberty and equality for all in this world. And if we don't do that, naturally, we get rejected by the rest of the organs.
I think the important thing to understand here is that what you're saying is the mission of being the chosen people is to make the rest of the world better through the efforts of Israel. So
yeah, it's the mission we chose. It's not, it wasn't even us that were chosen. It's us that chose that, which makes it even more. You chose that responsibility. It's like when you have a child, you chose to bring a life into this world. And now you need to take care of that child. And if a mother or father does not take care of that child, it is normal that the child then rejects that mother or father for not doing their job because they were supposed to do so. So we chose to take that function. Other nations can as well. That doesn't mean we're unique. That doesn't mean we're more or better. Other people can choose that as well. But until now, we chose this. And if we don't do this, then there's a rejection for not doing it.
So you're saying we chose to be the chosen people. God did not say you are the chosen people because you're better than anybody else. It is strictly to encourage the world to be better and to be better as an individual and as a collective, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the Torah says that the Jews chose, the Torah was offered to all nations, and we chose that.
I think it's an important message because this is where we are now. We're at a place where we all need to grow to be better. And we only grow through discomfort. So I think it makes sense we're going through this right now in 2020, although it's unfortunate we're still dealing with the same issues. But hopefully we can come to a place of Mashiach where we can all live together, cohesively connected, and happier, where we aren't judgmental, we work together. and it's just a better life for everybody. So thank you for shining light on what anti-Semitism is, what we're currently dealing with, your opinion on everything that's going on right now and how we can be better.
I love your mission and how you speak out for Jewish people and try to this is the whole purpose of this today, is like we have to educate ourselves about our history, and we have to have these uncomfortable conversations so that we continue to move forward and to be the light that we're supposed to be in this world. So thank you so much for being with us all the way from Israel. Baruch Hashem.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
Me.
Yeah.
So if anyone can, tune into your talks or your videos, where can people connect with you? Do you have any upcoming lectures you want to promote?
Well, they can connect on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, on YouTube. These are all platforms where I post my content and post stuff all the time. We have a ton more videos coming out that, whether they're debate videos from neo-Nazis to people that are anti-Israel, or conversations where we find common ground between Israelis and Palestinians. We actually have a new video coming out of a 3-on-3. We brought 3 Israelis and 3 Palestinians, and we had deep conversations on real issues to show how we can transcend the current conflict that exists, and how our liberation movements are not mutually exclusive, and how we're actually against the creation of a two-state solution on both sides. We're against the involvement of foreign organizations and powers and governments that have caused us to be separate, and we need to create a new generation, a new mindset, a new path to building a future together that fixes the injustices that both populations experience and fulfills the aspirations that both populations need.
By the way, before we sign off, where do you find people that will agree to come on and talk to you about these issues on your videos?
I mean, there are plenty of people out there. There is a heavy amount of anti-normalization, meaning pressure from the side of the Palestinians that tells them you should not engage with anyone that is a Zionist or a Jew or an Israeli. But there are people that are brave, and even those that can't be on camera out of risk of their lives. In fact, when I meet with Palestinians that are living in the West Bank, Judea, and Samaria, I'm a part of a movement called Habayit that unites both of us. We do events like cleaning the hate. We clean the pollution in Palestinian cities and Jewish cities. We do a lot of work together. Sometimes when we post pictures, we have to blur out their faces because if they're shown publicly, they get interrogated and jailed, and certain things that happens as a consequence to normalization. So there's certain individuals that can do it, certain individuals that can do it but not publicly, and certain individuals that were just raised with a mentality that the narrative is that you're the enemy. But what I've been saying is that if Israelis see Palestinians as their enemy and Palestinians see Israelis as their enemy, it becomes a zero-sum game. And there's no reality where either population disappears. So at some point, we need to be able to transcend the conflict and to build a better future. And that doesn't come with giving up on your needs and your aspirations. A lot of people working for quote unquote peace tend to give up on what's important for their aspirations of either side that they represent. So we need to keep the aspirations, and we need to fix the injustices and work on building that together. And to be honest, in the current structure that exists, regardless of how this situation has evolved, Israel is in a position of power. Palestinians cannot speak up, and the Palestinian Authority does not represent the Palestinians. They're on the 15th year of their 4-year term. So Israel, with all of its power, does have to take the first moves to changing the status quo. That doesn't mean I blame Israel for the conflict. That means I'm telling Israel, you have a greater responsibility and a greater ability to change something. And so this is a call on the government, on Bibi, on whoever is in a position of power. Start doing things to long-term change this conflict. Because if we talk about tikkun olam and olaguim, fixing the world and making the world a better place and being a light upon other nations, how about we fix our own backyard, our own home with our own cousins first?
Bezrat Hashem, I hope it happens. If you guys are watching and listening and you love this conversation, please subscribe and leave us a comment. All healthy conversation is welcome. We love to hear all types of opinions as long as it is a healthy dialogue. Thank you so much, Rudy Rochman. We hope to see you again soon from your 2 favorite Jewish girls. And Rudy, we'll see you guys next time for Breaking Down with Alie and Gabby.
Thank you.